We're going to invite the general and jurisdictional delegation to bring their report. You'll come forward to the stage.
They know they're supposed to.
Okay, the delegation, you're supposed to come too. So if you'll make your way up and be careful going up the steps there.
Good morning. So some of you were here in 2019 when our conference elected delegates for what was supposed to be a 2020 general conference. And then, as everybody knows, COVID. And so the 2020 General Conference has been postponed and rescheduled and postponed and rescheduled. But your delegation is still the delegation that was elected in 2019. And we're going to tell you a little bit about some of the work that we've been doing and some things that are upcoming. But I want to remind you who it is that is on your delegation. And so on the clergy side, there is myself, Carly Pidgeon, Katie McKay Simpson, John Cannon, Matt Rawl, Simon Chigamira, Marissa Horvath, and Ellen Alston. And on the laity side, we currently have Jennifer Swan, Nettles Brown, Margaret Washington, Adam Philly, and you will note that there are 4 vacancies, and those vacancies have come from people resigning from our delegation or withdrawing from the United Methodist Church. So we do have 4 vacancies there. And Jen Swan is going to talk to you about what might happen with those vacancies, or not happen with those vacancies.
All right, for the lay people in the room, if you were at lady session, we did talk about this a little bit, so I apologize if you're hearing it again, although I think it's confusing enough that it doesn't hurt to hear it twice. So as Reverend Wooden said, the general conference that we are holding in 2024 is the 2020 General Conference rescheduled for 2024. We elected 8 lay delegates to serve on our various jurisdictions. 3 of those lay delegates will vote at General Conference. There are an additional 3 delegates who also vote at jurisdictional conference. Our jurisdictional conference delegates serve as reserve delegates at General Conference. So we have a judicial council that makes rules or interprets the rules in our discipline about how and when and what, and tells us the bounds of which we're allowed to do. The judicial council has ruled that we can hold new elections to fill vacancies only if we cannot fill our voting spots with reserve delegates. So we're in a weird position because technically we do have 2 empty spots in our jurisdictional delegation from what we elected in 2019. However, we were able to hold the 2020 jurisdictional conference in 2022. So that's where we elected Bishop Williamson. Our jurisdictional conference delegates have met and have done their work. If we were to elect more jurisdictional conference delegates this year at annual conference, they would actually be 2024 jurisdictional conference delegates. They would not be reserve delegates for the 2020 general conference scheduled for 2024. So that is why we did not hold elections at Lady Session this year, and for that 2024 jurisdictional conference, we do anticipate that next year at annual conference, we will be having elections to elect new slates of delegates, unless judicial council tells us something different between now and then. Thanks. Oh, and then I think Adam Philly and Katie McKay Simpson are going to come and talk about boundaries.
I told someone we were talking about boundaries, and they were like, well, yeah, personal boundaries are important, and when to go home from work and turn off your phone. So my name is Adam Philly, and I'm a lay delegate serving at Broadmoor in Shreveport. So what is a Boundaries Committee? This is a committee that's made up of 1 lay and 1 clergy delegate from each annual conference across our jurisdiction. The committee typically only exists during the confines of jurisdictional conference. However, we as a Boundaries Committee recognize that due to our changing circumstances in the denomination, our work was going to take a little longer than the 3 days of jurisdictional conference. We sought permission from the delegates of the jurisdictional conference to continue our work until 2024, and they agreed. Our work, as stated in the title of the committee, is to evaluate annual conference boundaries and recommend any changes to geographic lines. I was hoping we might have a visual up there. That would be great. Okay, so what you see on the screens are our current boundaries.
So I don't know about you, but I have a mantra in my own life, in my house, that the only constant in the world is what? Change, right? So you see the boundaries that are before you currently in our South Central jurisdiction, and there are a couple of pairings that have already been made by a conference agency engaged to say we want to do this. But we are aware that due to the disaffiliations that each of our annual conferences in the jurisdiction have experienced, much of the budgets have been reduced, and certainly churches and pastors, those resources have drastically changed in number as well. So these changes mean that our current governance and our administrative structure in each of these conferences is either untenable, or it would behoove us to get ahead of the change that is coming and to initiate some pairings and some redrawings of lines that perhaps would be good and make sense and even life-giving for future relationships and mission and ministry moving forward. This is obviously a complex process that is covered in prayer and deep discernment. And any of those changes of boundary lines, if and when a proposal is put forward, it will be considered by the jurisdictional body, both lay and clergy, in July of 2024. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that that proposal will be one that will be implemented at that time. There's a lot of moving parts here. Could be in years or even a quad later, but we're trying to move forward with as much faithfulness and expediency as possible. So a little bit of technical talk. Just want you to know that we're not having this conversation starting over. We're really looking at the work that started in our jurisdiction back in 2012 with the Mission 21 report. You ask what that is? Well, just look it up, Mission 21, UMC. It'll come up, and you can see some of the intentional work that was done by that body and then one other subsequent body before we came to this work. And we are taking some of their wisdom to look at each of our annual conferences through a feasibility metrics or index and looking at 4 particular points to see how we can redraw these lines in a meaningful way. One of those is missional possibility and need. So what are some of the possibilities we have in the deserts and other areas that have rich ministry opportunities? Cultural affinity, so anything from our economies and industries to media markets, looking at how those things dovetail together. Geographic proximity, and then financial and human resources, both, again, the gifts of that and the potential barriers that we have to overcome. So all these present plans are being considered, and I think one of the gifts of this is that we're breaking some of the silos we've had in the past in our jurisdiction and working somewhat in conversation with our jurisdictional committee on episcopacy, so that when we think about episcopal deployment and then also the redrawing of lines, there will be some collaboration together for a fruitful future.
Our final proposal will be completed and submitted for consideration of fiscal concerns and then brought to the South Central Jurisdiction body, as Katie stated, next July of 2024. Once we have a final proposal, we will communicate that through our communications office to be sure that you are aware of its contents and can be in prayer for the conference's discernment toward that day. Our goal is to keep you as informed as possible of any possible changes to our current boundaries. I am in Shreveport, and Katie is in Baton Rouge. We have both ends of the state that we advocate for, and truly hope that our efforts have the best interest of the church at heart. During this work, I've had to keep my perspective on new opportunities and possibilities rather than a fear of change and the unknown. It was heartening to hear Dr. Bogan's talk about the many times that we as a denomination have undergone fundamental reorganizing. I know in my heart that if we keep our eyes on the mission of making disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world, that no boundary will have the power to limit or contain the work of the United Methodist Church and the kingdom of God.
So that is some of the work that your delegation has been up to. So we did, as Jen Swan mentioned, attend a jurisdictional conference that met in Houston in November of 2022. That was where Bishop Williamston was elected in a clearly historic fashion. And I want to say that, I've said this in other gatherings, she was the rock star bishop candidate at that jurisdictional conference. And I personally thought, there's no way she's ever going to come to Louisiana. Sorry, I just, and when she came out and she had those Mardi Gras beads on, our hearts leapt. So Bishop, yeah. So I want to tell you about one other highlight at that jurisdictional conference, and then that'll conclude our report. So as often happens in these types of gatherings, there are various resolutions that are submitted, and there was a resolution submitted at this jurisdictional conference by 47 LGBTQ plus delegates from all across Methodism, all across the world. One of the things that struck me about that list of 47 delegates was that 2 of them were listed as hidden faithful. They wouldn't reveal their names for fear of retribution. Let that sink in. So the resolution that was submitted was entitled, Queer Delegates Call to Center Justice and Empowerment for LGBTQIA plus people in the UMC. And as is always true of those resolutions, there were a whole list of therefores. There's one I want to read to you. The South Central Jurisdictional Conference of the United Methodist Church commits to a future of the United Methodist Church where LGBTQIA plus people will be protected, affirmed, and empowered in the ministry of the church in our jurisdiction. The resolution passed 128 to 35. Somebody should clap, yeah. So I bring this to your attention because to me, the adoption of this resolution was a small but hopeful step towards a dream many United Methodists have been longing for far too long. It names our aspiration, but until that aspiration is a reality, our work is not done. The 2020 General Conference of the United Methodist Church will meet in April of 2024 in Charlotte, North Carolina. I think we have a slide for that. Please be in prayer for our delegation. Thank you.